Привет! Hello, my dear friends! Today it's fifth lesson of our Russian language basic course for beginners. And today we'll start our first Russian grammar. Today we'll talk about gender of Russian nouns. Noun is part of speech that means object, subject, people, phenomena. Almost all words that you know now are nouns. They answer two questions. Кто, что. See, please. Кто это? Это мама. Кто means who. And question кто is about animate. About people, animals and so on. Кто это? Это папа. Кто это? Это учитель. And что means what? Что is question about inanimate, yeah? About objects. Что это? Это ручка. Что это? Это книга. So, today we'll talk about very important topic of Russian nouns. Gender of nouns. Gender in Russian is род. Род. There are three genders of Russian nouns in Russian language. Masculine, мужской род, feminine, женский род, and neutral, средний род. Gender of nouns in Russian language depends on ending. It's not so difficult rule. See, please. If word ends with consonant or y, it's masculine. For example, сын ends with n. N is consonant, so it's masculine. Дом ends with m. M is consonant, so it's masculine. Музей ends with y, so it's masculine. And you must remember that words папа, дедушка, дядя, мужчина end with a and ya, but they are masculine because they mean masculine people, yeah? It's easy. And one more exception. Кофе ends with y, but it's masculine. Кофе, он. Feminine. If word ends with a, я, it's feminine. For example, мама ends with a and it's feminine. Тетя ends with я and it's feminine. Сестра ends with a and it's feminine. And they mean feminine people. It's easy. Семья ends with я and it's feminine. Okay, and neutral. If word ends with or ye, it's neutral. For example, окно ends with o and it's neutral. Кафе ends with ye and it's neutral. But you must remember two exceptions. имя, время. They end with ya, but they are neutral. It's exceptions. And one more rule. If word ends with soft sign, it can be masculine or feminine. There are some rules that can help us to understand what gender of a noun that ends with a soft sign. For example, almost all words that end with тель are masculine. For example, учитель is masculine. And all words that end with sh, ch, ж are feminine. For example, ночь is feminine. But it's better to remember all these words. Remember words that end with soft sign and remember gender of these words. For example, тетрадь, тетрадь, она, it's feminine. Площадь, площадь, она, it's feminine. Словарь, словарь, он, it's masculine. Дождь, дождь, он, it's masculine. Don't panic, you will train and repeat these words and you'll remember them. It's okay. That's all about genders of nouns. It's not so difficult. And now let's train a little bit. Now I'll pronunciate words on topic food. Food, еда, еда. This word ends with a, so it's feminine. Now I'll tell you word and you try to understand what gender of this word is. Okay? Let's start. Bread, хлеб, хлеб. It ends with b, with consonant, so it's masculine. Butter, масло, масло. It ends with o, so it's neutral. Cheese, сыр, сыр. It ends with r, r is consonant, so it's masculine. Meat, мясо, мясо. It ends with o, so it's neutral. Tea, чай, чай. It ends with y, so it's masculine. And you remember, coffee ends with ye, but it's masculine too. Milk, молоко, молоко. Ends with o, so it's neutral. Ice cream, мороженое, мороженое. It ends with ye, so it's neutral. Мед, honey, мед. Ends with d, it's consonant, so it's masculine. Biscuits, печенье, печенье. Ends with ye, so it's neutral, оно. And pie, пирог, пирог. Ends with g, so it's masculine. And now little bit more words of topic food. Овощ. Овощ, vegetable, ends with sh, so it's masculine. Помидор. Помидор, it's tomato and it's masculine, ends with consonant. Огурец. Огурец, ends with ц, consonant, so it's masculine. Картофель, potato, картофель, ends with soft sign, and картофель is on, masculine. Морковь, carrot, морковь, ends with soft sign and is feminine, она. Капуста, капуста, cabbage, ends with a and it's feminine. Чеснок, чеснок, ends with k, consonant, so it's masculine. Лук, onion, лук, ends with k, it's consonant and it's masculine. And fruit, frukt, frukt in Russian, ends with t, it's consonant and it's masculine. Яблоко, apple, яблоко, ends with o, so it's neutral. Апельсин, апельсин, ends with n, consonant, so it's masculine. Банан, банан, ends with n, consonant, and it's masculine. Limon, limon, ends with n, consonant, and it's masculine. Виноград, grapes, виноград, ends with d, it's consonant, and it's masculine. Pineapple, ananas, ananas, ends with s, it's consonant, and it's masculine. Персик, peach, персик, ends with k, it's consonant, and it's masculine. Груша, груша, ends with a, and it's feminine. And granat, granat, ends with t, it's consonant, and it's masculine. So you know names of different food, vegetables and fruit. And you know all about genders of Russian nouns. Now please go to my website, see materials of this lesson, take your homework, train, and see you in the next lesson. Bye!